On March 2nd, 1976, a North Carolina park ranger spotted smoke some distance away from the fire tower he was monitoring. He estimated that the smoke was coming from a forest outside of a small community in North Carolina called Columbia on the Outer Banks. He found the source of the smoke, but he was not prepared for what he found there. 5 human bodies, covered in gasoline, were burning. Next to them lied a shovel that was used to build the makeshift ditch they laid in. Of the 5 bodies, 2 of them were adult women, and the other 3 were young boys, still clothed in their pajamas. Their causes of death were all blunt force trauma, but law enforcement had no idea who they were or where they were from. About a week later, a call was made about a family in Bethesda, Maryland, who had not been seen in some time. The next-door neighbors were concerned as their mail began to pile up. The family who lived in this house consisted of a man who was a successful U.S. State Department employee, as well as his wife, his mother-in-law, and his 3 boys, ages 14, 10, and 5. Police then went to investigate their home on a welfare check and found the house empty. They also found multiple pools of blood in various rooms that suggested a violent struggle had taken place. The family's 1974 Chevrolet station wagon and their dog were missing, and even though this house was 300 miles from the bodies the park ranger had just found, law enforcement officials knew the 2 incidents were connected somehow. The FBI quickly identified the burned bodies found in the Outer Banks as the entire Bishop family, except for the husband, who was unaccounted for. This obviously made Brad Bishop the number 1 suspect. While law enforcement nailed down Brad Bishop as their main suspect, nothing about his life or mental state lined up with this homicidal rampage. By all accounts, he was a well-educated man and a well-compensated man who spent much of his time overseas enjoying and learning about other cultures. It wasn't until officials delved deeper into the Bishop's home life that they began to get to know the real Brad Bishop. Brad had been known to have violent outbursts. He was also an insomniac. He was passed over for a promotion at work. Immediately, he left the office under the guise of sickness, took out $700, and purchased a hammer and gasoline. Evidence alleges that Bishop returned home and took his wife as his first victim by way of the hammer. Next was his own mother, who had just walked in the door from walking the dog. Next, he snuck into his children's bedrooms and ended all 3 of their lives with the same hammer. He then loaded the bodies in the family station wagon and set off as a fugitive. The last time Bishop was officially seen was one day after the murders in the town of Jacksonville, North Carolina, where he used a credit card to buy shoes. Witnesses say he had a woman with him that walked the dog while he shopped. The woman's identity was never discovered. On March 18th, a little over 2 weeks after the murders, law enforcement received a report from an Elkmont resident that a station wagon matching the description of Bishop's had been parked at the Jakes Creek trailhead for a couple of weeks. Rangers responded to the call, checked the station wagon, but were unable to find anything out of place from just looking inside. When the ranger called the license plate number in, that's when they knew the station wagon was indeed Bishop's. With the FBI now in the national park to investigate the station wagon, they found a shotgun with shells, dog treats, and clothing inside the vehicle. The most likely assumption from the wagon was that Bishop was somewhere in the backcountry of the national park, which meant that the FBI was going to need trackers who knew this area like the back of their hand. So 25 FBI agents, along with rangers to aid in tracking, began a search party with the epicenter being Elkmont. The tracking team even included 2 German Shepherds, one of which was involved in the search for Jimmy Hoffa. On March 20th, law enforcement decided to close the backcountry and begin interviewing hikers as they emerged from the woods. Multiple potential sightings were being reported from hikers. One had Bishop walking along a road to Gatlinburg. Another had Bishop walking along the Little River Road with a backpack. And yet another report had some Texas Boy Scouts reportedly seeing Bishop with a woman. More and more reports flooded in from almost every single location in the park. The FBI ran every single lead, but were unable to get any trail on Bishop. The search was called off, and law enforcement believed that Bishop was not alive in the park. That is to say that if he was in the park, they thought he had shot himself. Bishop wouldn't have been the first or last person to vanish without a trace in the Smokies, but after the FBI dug into the mind of Bishop more and more, they got the impression that Bishop would run until he couldn't run anymore. Bishop had the ability to change who he was. He was fluent in multiple languages and knew intimately enough to get by as the citizen of virtually any other country. This made Bishop an immediate risk to travel overseas to get away. As the trail went ice cold, the media never gave up on the story. For decades after, articles were written on the potential whereabouts of Bishop. In 2013, an article written by Eugene Meyer would change everything we knew about the case. In the article, Meyer says that as the Maryland police were searching Bishop's State Department files, they found a letter. This letter was from a now-dead prisoner that was doing time in a federal prison in Illinois at the time of writing the letter. The letter, addressed to Bishop, alleged that Bishop was involved in a murder-for-hire scheme to get rid of his family while Bishop was on a business trip. One man mentioned in this plot was David Allen, who had knowledge of where the bodies were burned. Allen confessed that he received money from Bishop to murder his family, but he insists that they never went through with the murders. As law enforcement got wind of this article, they went back to examine that letter in question, but it had been taken out of the file by an anonymous FBI agent before they could get to it. This was quickly becoming a conspiracy. Over the years, many people who knew Brad Bishop on a personal level have reported seeing him in Europe. And this isn't just one instance, it was many. From Stockholm to Italy, Bishop had been spotted by friends who said they approached the man only to have him flee nervously when they asked him if he was indeed Bishop. In 2014, the FBI reopened the case, landing Bishop on the top 10 most wanted list, in hopes that social media could have a shot at getting Bishop. That year, the FBI received a report of the death of a homeless man who resembled Bishop, but was ultimately proved by DNA not to be Bishop. Nearly 50 years later, police are still searching for Bishop, and while most of them think he is living his life in Europe, others are not so sure. Bishop could very well still be in the park. It wouldn't be a surprise at all to find him living out his life in the backcountry or simply pushing up daisies. This is one of the greatest mysteries of the 20th century, and the question still begs an answer. Is Brad Bishop, the mass murderer, still inside the Great Smoky Mountains National Park today?